This video was sponsored by Brilliant, a problem-solving website that teaches you how to think like an engineer. A couple of weeks ago, I went to this event where I met a lot of other YouTubers, and as soon as I arrived, it hit me that all of these really social media savvy people, whenever they shared anything to social media, it was all in the form of stories. YouTube stories, Instagram stories, Snapchat, Snaps? Stories? I don't know what they're called. Anyway, stories were clearly the overwhelmingly preferred content format of choice for people who really know how to use social media. And on a rational level, I knew that stories were a huge deal. I mean, I've read the news articles saying how quickly they're growing compared to other social media formats. I've seen every conceivable platform try to adopt them, from social media to messaging, and then also really weird ones like Skype and LinkedIn and Medium for some reason. But seeing them being so overwhelmingly dominant in real life with real users still took me by surprise. So I decided to dedicate the 54th episode of the Story Behind series to figuring out what exactly makes stories so successful. Real quick before we start, if you would like to see more in-depth analysis of tech companies, especially from a business perspective, consider subscribing to TechAltar. As confusing as this format was to me at first, something clicked when I thought about it in historical context. Historically, every medium eventually created a dominant format that seems obvious in retrospect. Paper peaked with newspapers as the printing processes made the bundling together of a bunch of articles into a little booklet really effective. The early internet peaked with static websites, as hyperlinking made individual web pages that users could hop between in a browser very effective. The killer format of Web 2.0, the interactive web, was the newsfeed, as the billions of user-generated posts and photos neatly fell into place in an infinitely scrollable wall of content. And so it is natural that smartphones as a medium would also sooner or later develop a truly native format as well, which is what stories seem to be. While the newsfeed has over time been adopted to work well enough on smartphones with the introduction of mobile native interactions like double tapping to like or pinching to zoom on Instagram, for example, even in its most up-to-date form, it still feels very much like a desktop internet product that was just squeezed into phones. Newsfeeds consist mostly of text, links to articles, and static images that work more or less the same on desktops and on smartphones. Creating a post for a newsfeed often requires a lot of typing, which is not ideal with virtual keyboards, and visual elements tend to be laid out horizontally, so the user has to expand them or even rotate their phone to see them properly. These, in my opinion, are all artifacts of a format that wasn't originally conceptualized for smartphones, but rather adopted to them afterwards. Which makes sense because Facebook came up with the newsfeed about a year before the iPhone came to the market and about 2 years before Android was announced. Stories, though, while they might feel endlessly clumsy on a desktop, were tailor-made for smartphones. They make full use of the small screens phones have without any wasted white space, and they are locked to portrait mode, no more having to rotate the phones around. Navigation is done by tapping and swiping, which is natural on touchscreen smartphones, and creating stories is easier on phones too, as they usually just require a tap on a shutter button and maybe a selection of an AAR sticker rather than lengthy text input on clumsy virtual keyboards. Stories are undoubtedly the premier smartphone format and seem to slowly move beyond just personal updates too. Google, for example, has introduced AMP Stories, Accelerated Mobile Pages Stories, for news, which are essentially a format that lets news organizations do journalism in a more visually engaging way on smartphones. In a similar way, Medium, the hugely popular blogging platform, has recently introduced Series, which is just their take on stories, so bloggers can easily use that format too. The adoption of stories has been slower for journalism than it has been for social sharing, but it's slowly starting to happen too. Talking about adoption, stories now have over 500 million active users on each of the 3 big Facebook platforms. Usage has grown by over 800% in the last 2 years, and Facebook executives in 2018 said that the story format is on a path to surpass feeds as the primary way people share things with their friends sometime next year. So that would be now-ish, I guess. Of course, stories working well on smartphones isn't the only thing that made them popular. I'd say there are 2 more key factors to their success. 1, the fact that they don't stick around forever, which people really seem to dig, and 2, the fact that they're great as advertisement vehicles, which advertisers seem to love. And I'll admit, when I first heard about a platform that was designed to send self-destructing photos and videos, I struggled to understand how it would become relevant beyond just, sending nudes and stuff. I'm clearly not a social media visionary, and in fact, I still actually prefer tweeting as my main social media as opposed to stories. So, by the way, if you want to follow me on any of the social medias, Twitter is probably the right one. But what self-destructing stories have enabled, beyond just the sending of nudes of course, is for posts to become more spontaneous. Because regular social media, the newsfeed kind of stuff, has weirdly become this fairly high-pressure environment for a lot of people. Anything that goes on your wall typically stays there, including quantified metrics for how popular or unpopular your posts are. This permanence and kind of competitive environment made users heavily curate newsfeed posts, aiming to only put the most popular stuff up. Stories, on the other hand, have much less of this pressure to be perfect. They self-destruct, so they aren't permanent, and likes are hidden, so the pressure for perfection is lower. Unsurprisingly, this means that stories have significantly higher upload frequencies and appear less curated and more authentic than newsfeed posts. And finally, money is starting to flock to stories as well, because of course any format that will make content more engaging will likely also lead to advertising on the platform becoming more engaging. Indeed, stories allow for full-screen video ads, often with audio, to be injected right between organic posts without them feeling too out of place. Don't get me wrong, they're still annoying, but much less so than auto-playing full-screen ads would feel in almost any other format on a phone. It is not a surprise then that the advertisers are increasingly throwing more and more money at stories, with over 25% of total advertisement spending on Instagram, for example, already going to this format. And seeing this massive growth in usage as well as ever more engaged audiences and advertisers, I'd be surprised if stories didn't eventually become the primary revenue driver for Facebook. Now, while stories might be great for the bottom line of companies, I think for you, the user, they're just an even more engaging way to waste your time, your brain cells, and to consume even more advertisements. So if you find yourself with 5 minutes to spare and you have your phone with you, why not try the Brilliant app instead? It lets you learn real science and engineering on the go. With just 5 minutes a day, you can do Brilliant's daily challenges and learn a new scientific concept every day, like how astronomers find planets using starlight, for example. If you prefer more in-depth learning, you can complete one of their fully interactive courses, like this one on computer memory, for example, that give you the proper framework and context to fully understand the subject and use quizzes to drive your learnings home at the end. Go to brilliant.org/TechAltar and sign up for free, or get 20% off an annual premium subscription with the same link.